All right, hey folks, Jesse with Southern Reels Fishing, and today I'm going to get into tautog fishing, and I pretty much want to share everything that I know about it. All right, so tautog, also referred to as a tog. Some places call them blackfish, chubs, oysterfish. I've even heard the adult males referred to as chinners because of the white markings that they get under their chin and like almost a block jaw. They're actually a member of the wrasse family of fish, and I'm not going to get into all that. They have like this thick, rubbery kind of skin, a heavy coating of slime, which actually protects them from the structure that they live in, the rocks and everything that they typically hang around. They got these big thick lips on them, which are hilarious looking, and teeth that have molars down farther in their throat, very similar to like sheephead, that allow them to chew up and crush the crustaceans and shellfish and stuff that they typically feed on. They can be found anywhere from Nova Scotia up north all the way down as far as like Georgia, South Carolina, depending on the time of year. Majority of them are kind of in the middle of the eastern seaboard. They can grow up to 3 foot in length, around 28 pounds from what I've read. I ain't never seen one that big. Typically what we catch around here is anywhere from 14 up to about 20, 22 inches. They're a very popular fish to fish for because the trickiness of catching them, mainly because of the structure that they live around. They're also a very delicious fish because of the white flaky meat that they have. It has a very unique texture and taste, almost more similar to like shrimp or lobster, I would say, more so than like a flaky fish from what you expect. They typically feed during the day only, and they have been known to actually rest at night in the structure that they live around. I've read that divers have actually seen them literally laying in their holes that they're in on their sides, almost like they're sleeping, which is pretty wild. A very predictable fish as far as where they're going to be. They live around structure, plain and simple. Rocks, jetties, bridges, wrecks, pretty much anything that has a hole or a protective area that they can get in and hide in. That's where they live, which makes them easy to find, but also makes it difficult to fish for them because of the amount of snags and everything that you typically run into in those areas. As far as their diet, what they typically eat, of course, you know, crustaceans and stuff, shrimp, pretty much anything in that whole family of fish that they run across, they'll chew up and eat, which is typically what we use for bait for them, which is what I'll cover next. Most popular baits: Asian crabs, green crabs, fiddler crabs, blue crabs, shrimp, clam. Some people talk about using lobster, which to me sounds crazy, are popular baits for these. To be honest with you, I've had the best success using just shrimp with the shell still on them, not necessarily head-on shrimp. I haven't really noticed a difference there. Just bait shrimp with the shell still on them is what I have caught most of the tog that I have caught on. Some people insist, oh, you got to use crabs, you got to use crabs. I've been fishing with people side by side with them when they wouldn't bite the crab, but they were tearing shrimp up. So I suggest using shrimp, at least in the colder months of the year. Now, if like where I typically fish, I'm in the Chesapeake Bay, up around the Bay Bridge and some of the nearshore wrecks and stuff up there. Shrimp works very well in the colder months of the year when there's not many what I call interference fish around, like black sea bass, croaker, stuff like that that would inundate shrimp. Later in the season when you're fishing for them, yeah, you're probably going to have to use crab, or if you're offshore fishing wrecks, like out in the ocean, you're definitely going to have to use crab because of so many other fish that would just tear the shrimp up before it even had a chance to get down to them. But anyway, if you're fishing like inland and it's in the colder months of the year, definitely give shrimp a try. I have had more success with that than I have ever had fishing with crab. All right, as far as the rigs and stuff that I use, I'm typically using a few different things here, and I'll show you real quick. All right, so this is what I got here is my little spread. I got the jigs that I would typically use, a couple different styles here that I've tried. And of course, I've got some hand-tied bottom rigs here that I would use, and just the stuff that I pretty much use to tie these rigs out of, which I'll show you each of these individually here real quick. All right, so here we go. Jigs, I've had more success with these for tog. Of course, I have tried them more. This here is actually a bottom sweeper. This is a 3 ounce. This is the largest one that they offer. The 2 and the 3 ounce versions in the areas that I fish, which are basically around the Chesapeake Bay Bridge area and the wrecks close by. This is what I've had great success with. I love these. They're actually awesome jigs. So much so that I actually bought some molds and got an entire setup going to where I made my own variation of them. Now these are jigs that I have made and poured myself just for cost efficiency. You know, I was talking about actually releasing these and starting to sell them, which I'm having second thoughts about because they are very similar to bottom sweepers, and I don't want to be that guy. So I'm probably just going to keep them for personal use. There's some other variations that I found on the market here. This is like a little swing hook jig that would work. I haven't actually tried these. And this is the one that I was using last year, the first marketed tog jig that I came across. It's got a heavy weight. Typically tog jigs have a heavier weight but a smaller hook Probably a 3 to 4/0 range is about the most that you would see fishing for tog. But this right here is a nice jig. The only thing I didn't like about this is the fact that it was like $6 a piece, and really the hooks they're not any good, to be honest with you. As far as my own bottom rigs that I tie, I basically tie these out of 30 or 40 pound fluorocarbon, which I have just trick fish here is what I use. I have 2 spools here. Most of these are tied out of 30 that I use up around shore, and these are pretty much just a surgeon's loop on the end with a bank sinker, and then a dropper loop, you know, and then just a long lead here, which I would tie directly to the braid that I'm using on my fishing poles. I'll get to that in a second. And as far as the hooks, I've been using Gamakatsu 2/0 or 3/0 bait holder hooks. These guys right here, I like these. They're very sharp. I have a good hookup with them, but I have noticed that a lot of times when you're trying to remove them from the fish's mouth, these tend to snap off. So I'm looking into other alternatives for that now. I may switch over to owner. And oh yeah, also on these bottom rigs, the weights that I use, I love these bank sinkers right here. I actually make my own sinkers, once again for cost efficiency. I have found get snagged the less, and I think it's because of the nice smooth roundness of it on the top here. Any sinker that has the wire forms into it that you tie to, I've always seen they've gotten snagged more with them. I've had better success with these, and these are actually less expensive than almost every other sinker out there. And these bottom rigs here, basically this is fluorocarbon, and I tie this directly to the braid that I'm using. I don't use any swivels or anything like that, because like I said, the more swivels or metal pieces that you use on the line, the more likely you are to get snagged on stuff. So what I'll do is like do a little loop on the end of this, take my braid, feed it through it, and proceed to tie what they call a modified Albright knot. That's my go-to knot for basically every leader that I tie to braid. That's all I use is a modified Albright. Look it up on YouTube. I don't have a video for it, but it's super easy to tie. You can tie it in about 15 seconds. I've heard about the FG knot. Trust me, everybody's heard about the FG knot. It's the strongest knot out there, and you know what? I tried it. It's a super pain in the butt to tie, and I ain't never had any issues with the ones that I use coming loose, as long as you retie them from time to time and keep your eye on them. As far as how I rot the baits, like on a jig, these here, I actually will just take a piece of shrimp and just feed it right on the hook to where the shrimp, it looks like a continuation of the jig with the tail sticking up like that, and keeps it in a straight line with it. You don't want to put the shrimp on here to where it's like sideways like this, because it's just more drag in the water. You want the shrimp kind of just threaded right on it in line with it. I do the same thing with these hooks here. When I thread the shrimp on this hook, I'll just take it, just thread it right on like that, like it's basically the hook is entirely hidden inside of the piece of shrimp or crab or whatever that I'm using. Another trick that I do when I'm fishing for these, I'll basically drop the jig or this bottom sinker setup down. This actually seems to work better with jigs. I'll drop it all the way down to the bottom, and I'll let it sit there. And you know, I'll let it sit for 20, 30 seconds. And then I'll take that rod tip and I'll bounce it just a little bit to where that jig is down there, and it's like sitting in that silt on the bottom. And it's like, boom, you know, just wiggles up and down a little bit. And it stirs up this little silk cloud is what it does. And that silk cloud kind of puffs out, and then the current slowly takes it away. But I've actually seen video footage of how tautog are like very curious fish, and they'll be swimming by and they'll see something almost like it's moving over there. And that little silk cloud draws their attention, and they actually come in afterwards and kind of want to see what it is. And at the same time, it kind of resembles like a little crab or something trying to move or try to get away. And I've actually had that trigger bites before, and typically that's how I've had my best luck catching them. So most of the time, the weights that I'm using in the Chesapeake Bay area where I'm fishing in current, 2-ounce jig on the slower current days, up to a 3-ounce in the heavy days. And even when the worst current gets through, sometimes 3-ounce just isn't enough. I don't have anything heavier than a 3-ounce jig, so that's when I will typically switch over to the bottom rig setups. Now I have 2 styles of bottom rigs. This one here is a single hook, and then I also have a setup that I tie with basically a tandem hook setup, a high-low rig, how it would be referred to. Now the reason I have 2 is getting in an area where you're getting snagged a lot. If you drop down to 1 hook, it will definitely help you out. Or if you're fishing in very high current situations, you would be amazed the amount of drag in flowing water that having another hook and another piece of bait adds to a rig. So if I'm having issues holding ground, even with 3 to 4 ounces of weight, that's when I'll drop down to a single hook setup versus a double. It just reduces the amount of drag on the line and really doesn't make much difference from what I've noticed in the amount kind of fish that you catch. Now the length of the dropper loop here is a bit longer on this one than I would typically want. I usually have it pretty short just to help with the sensitivity of when that fish comes up, because they have a very sensitive bite at first. They'll typically come up and kind of chew a little bit on it first before they actually take it and start eating it. And it's a big debate on when you should swing for these. I've caught them swinging like a ninja at the first little bite that I get, and I've also lost fish that way. And I've typically found myself waiting until I get that second considerable little nibble, which usually comes very shortly after the first. I'd say within 5 to 8 seconds, you'll usually get that second little blah, 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 and that's usually when I'll swing. And that's the next thing, is swinging at them. You definitely want to be ready for taw because they're in structure. They're down in there deep. So you want to have your pole, let me zoom this out. You literally want to have this thing, your rod tip low, down on the water, ready to swing at that fish when it comes. And as soon as you get that hit and you dedicate to it and you hook him up, especially if you're fishing offshore wrecks, you want to lift your pole up as high as you can get it, like so, and then immediately start reeling. Because basically what you're doing is that initial hit, when that fish grabs it, that's your chance to get him out of that structure. And if you tend to like set the hook and then crank back down and drop that rod like that and go for that second pump, a lot of times when you drop that rod back down, he runs and dives for cover because he's felt something he ain't like, and that's when you'll get snagged. And I've had more luck literally with pulling this tip up as high as you can get it and immediately cranking in that position until you get a good feel for him and get him a good 10 feet away from whatever structure that is that he's in, especially if you're offshore fishing. Now, sometimes when you swing for them, they still get snagged, and that's happened. And a lot of times at that point, when I realize that he's got me wrapped around something or he's got me snagged, I'll actually crank down and let some line loose and give him a little bit of slack and just wait a second and just see what he does, and then give it another good firm pull or pump. And at least half of the time that I have done that, I've successfully gotten the fish out of whatever he was in. Maybe he swam a little bit or just loosened that line up just enough for it to come loose to help you get him out from around whatever it is that he got you wrapped in. So about half of the time it works. The other half of the time, you're just going to end up breaking off, and that's just tog fishing. As far as the tackle that I'm using, low profile bait caster reels is what I use. This is the Quantum Accurus AC 101 HPT. This is a really nice $100 reel that I use for tog, sheephead, and flounder jigging. This is John Skinner's actually go-to reel for flounder fishing, and I found out it works very well for sheephead and tog as well. It's a really good fight on these reels. I like this because it has a flipping switch on it, which basically makes depth adjustments very easy. It's just a nice low-profile reel, and those fish are an excellent fight on this. Actually, this pole right here is a Stellar Rod PG 12201 SM, which is rated for 12 to 20 pound tests. I have 20 pound braid on it. This is actually my heavier duty flounder jigging setup that I use for flounder fishing, and it works very well for smaller tog that you run into around the bridges and stuff. I'd say anything up to probably about 20, 24 inches. I do have another one here, the exact same reel. This one is on a little bit more beefy of a pole. This is a Shimano Travala offshore jigging rod. It is a TVC 66M. This pole is rated for 30 to 80 pound braid, and I actually have 40 pound braid on it. This is what I use when I'm fishing in really heavy structure, if I'm having issues with trying to drag them out from under something that I'm catching them on. I'll typically use the 40 pound leader on this setup in those situations. You can also use spinning reels, even though I don't really ever use them for this type of fishing. I only use these type of reels when I'm casting, never when I'm jigging. That's just my preference. I like bait casters when I'm jigging for whatever reason. I'd say at least a 3,000 or higher reel. These would work perfectly fine for it. That's just my preference. I prefer bait casters. As far as the fishing line that I'm using, I'm running minimum 20 pound braid when I'm fishing for tog. The heavier one would be 40 pound braid. I like Power Pro. Out of all of them I've tried, it's the one that I seem to come back to always. Not the Ultra Slick, just a regular Power Pro in the green. That's what I use. It's my preferred line. All these setups that I got here are pretty much too light, I feel, for offshore fishing when you're getting those big monsters. That's when you're going to go to a more conventional bait caster style reel, you know, much larger than this. These low profiles work great for the inland waters and stuff. Offshore, I don't think it's going to be enough. I'm going to find out this year though. Well, there you go, guys. I think that's everything that I have. I tried to cover it all. Of course, I may have forgotten something, which I'll add in the comments if I did. If you have any input on this, please let me know. I'm always curious to learn. Like I said, this is just what I've picked up on the time that I've been fishing for 'em. I hope this helps somebody out there. Please comment below if you have anything to add. Like the video if you like it. Subscribe to my channel. I'd appreciate it. I plan on doing a lot more tutorials like this over the next year and try to cover pretty much everything that I learn and give it out. And hopefully I'll be able to do a lot more of them on the water. Just wanted to get this out today, and I'm here in my shop, so that's that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Peace out. See ya.